Hey everyone, this is smpratte, and today we're going to talk about black labels. Are they worth it? A lot of you have asked me this question over the past couple of years. I just talked about it in Patreon, and in my opinion, black labels today are more popular than ever. Even if you go back a couple of years, there were maybe a handful of people messing with them, where now they have definitely carved out a niche, and I think they add a nice challenge to a lot of the popular cards people are chasing. So what is a black label? It's simply the highest grade you can get with Beckett. They have the BGS 9 with the mixture subgrades and the BGS 9.5 with the mixture subgrades, your vanilla, quad, quad plus, quad plus plus. Then you have the 10 pristine, and then finally you have the black label. It's the 10 of the 10s. It's the highest of the high grades that you can achieve if you are collecting condition. So why did the black label become so much more popular just within a few years? I think the answer is definitely within modern, and it's twofold. You have the printers going burr, so there's more quantity, and the printers are also better. The quality is much better than it was like pre-X and Y especially. If you were not here to suffer through pre-X and Y condition, we're about to run it back real quick. I swear Pokemon was cutting those cards with Flintstone technology. Like, if you told me they did it with Stonehammer, I would believe it, because I had black and white cards coming out of the packs with indents, with whitening, diamond and pearl shinings. I would pull it out of the pack and it had front chipping. It's like you were just born today. Like, how do you have chipping? I just pulled you right now live. So that was the reality, is not only back then you had less quantity because Pokemon wasn't as popular, but the quality overall was a lot more bumpy. Yeah, you had smooth times in there, maybe some EX cards, maybe a bit of E series, but the bottom line is overall it was a bumpier road with condition. I had so many Plasma Charizards, I probably graded at least 30 of those and had 110. And that 10 just like inched across the finish line to get a 10. Like, it barely got across the 10 finish line. So back then, the condition was worse, the quantity was lower, where today, both of those are the opposite. There are so many more cards printed, and the quality is much better. Yeah, there's condition issues here and there, print lines or whatever, but overall, much better quality, much more quantity. So what does that do? It lowers the difficulty. You have less of a challenge. So I think that's why black labels are more popular today, is because you are fulfilling that like desire, that itch, those collector juices. They want to get the best of the best of the best. You want to see all the pixels align, no whitening whatsoever. I think that's why black labels are playing more of a role now. And especially within modern, if you go back a few years, you had maybe a couple cards here and there, but it was a lot more vintage focused, where now I think black labels are more modern focused for the reasons stated. You have so many more cards, such better quantity, so you need something a little more challenging. Even stuff like this, just cards I've lying around the grandma house. Beautiful Charizard illustration contests, obviously not a super rare card, so what are you left with? Not too difficult to acquire, but if you want to get the best of the best of the best, that's what the black label is really thriving with right now. Now, getting into, is it worth it? If that wasn't deep enough, get your scuba gear on, we're going deeper. We're going to talk about a term called resolving power, which is made famous by the other Scott, Piffy, the bunny, PFM on E4. Resolving power is simply the ability of an instrument, in this case the grader, to separate or distinguish between a small or closely adjacent image. So what that means in relation to grading is, if you look at the PSA grading scale, you have a 9 and a 10. That's it, nothing in between. So you have basically an inch measurement. Where if you go over to Beckett, you have the BGS 9 with all the subgrade variants, then the 9.5 with all the subgrade variants. So these are little like centimeter differentials here. Then you have your 10 pristine, and then finally your black label. So between the 9 and the 10 on the Beckett scale, you have all these other little possibilities, where with PSA, it's literally either a 9 or a 10. Now, you'll have cards that sit in between grades, like that Plasma Charizard I talked about that just inched across the finish line that I graded ages ago. There are cards I'm like, yeah, I could see it being a 10 or a super strong 9. There are definitely plenty of those. However, the resolving power point is the ability to differentiate between those two. And objectively, it's much easier to differentiate between something like this. Like, if I send in a card with a little chip of whitening on the corner, it's going to get a 9 every single time. Or if I throw that over the Beckett, what are the subgrades going to be like? Are they always going to be the same? There was a Magic card posted on E4 that I think perfectly illustrated this point. A very popular Arabian Nights card that was sent in, I think, 4 or 5 times, and every single time it came back with a different grade. Whether the entire grade upgrade, I think it actually bumped all the way to a 10 pristine at the final grade, but in between, you had a variety of subgrades. I think every single time there was at least some change in the subgrades, and then finally it hit the pristine 10. So the point is here, like in all my videos, is just to make you aware what you're getting into. I'm not trying to throw the baby out the bathwater. As always, not sponsored by any of these companies, couldn't care less. Do whatever you want to do as a consumer. But the bottom line is it's much easier. The resolving power is going to be more accurate when you're looking at a wider range of 9 to 10 versus 9 with all the subgrades, 9.5 with all the subgrades, 10 pristine, and then 10 black label. So with that said, there are plenty of Mona Lisa condition cards out there that are just absolutely flawless that will be a black label regrade over and over again. I'm sure some of these guys right here will probably qualify as that. You know, these are like Kevlar back, new back Japanese cards, and they are probably going to be no less than like a PSA 10 or higher. So there's plenty of cards that are truly in that condition. However, I think there's a lot that have more of a range, and it's harder to differentiate when you're dealing with all those centimeters. It's harder to be as consistent if you sent those cards in, 3, 4, 5 times, where again, the wider space there, it's easier to be more consistent. So the resolving power idea is very relevant to black labels, and if you want to go even deeper, PFM on E4 has a video where he explains it with his science background, and it really just exemplifies and highlights the difference between what you're looking at, what you're getting into when you go into different grading scales and you're trying to chase that condition. And again, it's not naysaying either one, it's just trying to show the differences. One other thing I want to talk about is the connotation of value. So there are a lot of cards, as we know, they're harder to grade than others. Plasma Charizard, we have beat that Charizard into the ground in this video. That's a tough one. Yeah, pretty much a lot of the holo cards from Neogen, T17, Slow King, Pre-Leaska Fable, even first edition base holos. I think most of them don't even have a single black label. There's people who would take that connotation from like the really tough to grade and iconic popular cards and say, yeah, so that Uno card over there that maybe like 5 people care about, it has a black label on it. So that's something I see happening a lot right now with the black labels, is this false connotation of some random non-TCG card that just has a black label slapped on it. And again, if you want that, more power to you. But the reality is I think there's definitely a connotation borrowed from like the popular WotC cards or the popular modern cards or the hard to grade cards. And people borrow that connotation. Like, so yeah, that Uno card that nobody cares about otherwise, unless there's a black label. Just trying to as positively talk about that point, because I think that's part of the game, is that there are real connotation cards, like, a Charizard black label, even an unlimited, I think is definitely like a super popular item. Even for me, I'm like, I could do a black label Charizard. That's definitely one that is so popular and iconic. I think it has a real connotation, a real value. Or like, let's say a Masaki card. Masakis are notoriously difficult to grade. Like at this point, if you get an 8 to 9 Masaki, like, it's like that grading scale almost needs to be adjusted. Like an 8 is a 9, a 9 is a 10, because Masakis are so tough to grade. So the point is, these actually are like the real deal. Like if you see a black label on a Masaki, a Charizard, a Neogen like T17 or Slow King or something with a low pop, that's something that's like, okay, for sure, this is the real deal. Where the random Uno card or like whatever Topps refractor thing it is, or whatever, super, super niche within the niche card that people aren't like deeply going after. And, again, if that's your thing, more power to you. But I feel like sometimes there's like a false connotation, whether the example is the playing deck cards, because a lot of those I think just don't have the exposure. Like I would go out on a limb and say there's a lot of those decks or cards probably sitting in closets somewhere that aren't just on the market because there's not much organic demand on their own. And, maybe people just want the best of that one card, the Bandai, whatever it is, refractor. So that's one thing I want to talk about here at the end of the video, is that there's definitely a crossover connotation I see the most with black labels. I don't see it with the other stuff as much, but I think there's like cards that otherwise would just fly under the radar. But because they have a black label that's borrowed, I think, again, because these super popular cards and the value and like the actual like notoriety of getting one on a hard graded card is borrowed, for some of those. So the takeaway here is that black labels basically add a challenge to cards that aren't necessarily challenging on their own. You have a lot of cards today that I think, like these Charizards. I love this card. I can't say enough about it. Talked about it in Patreon. I help people get it for free, essentially, if you were there when this promotion was happening in Patreon. I love everything about it. It's Charizard, hand-drawn, illustration contest, Japanese exclusive, and it's not rare. it's a very available card. But the bottom line is not much of a challenge. So if you really want to climb the ladder with this thing condition wise, I think that's what Black Labels are really doing right now. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I think there's some people want the best of the best. Me personally, I usually tap out with the PSA 10. I'm good with that. I'm not a huge condition collector. I'm more about the card and the history and all that. And then condition secondary. But earlier, smpratte 5 minutes ago was like, I could do a Black Label Charizard. So it's something that definitely has filled more of a role today. And I think the resolving PowerPoint is, again, just to make you aware of what you're getting into, understand the inherent subjectivity of grading, and that when you have all these little centimeters, it's a lot more difficult to distinguish between them than it is to distinguish between 1.9 and 1.10 grade. But as always, guys, the point of this is just about getting that knowledge out there to better help you, chase your goals and satisfy that collector itch. And that's what I have right now on Black Labels. As usual, you know the deal. Let me know how you feel. That's pretty much it. Till next time.